And we are live. Greetings, salutations, and welcome to this monstrously good live streamed podcast. We are talking Monster Hunters, and who better to join me than the amazing, the best selling, the award winning Laura Anne Gilman. Laura Anne, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, some of you may remember last year we had Laura Ann talking about gas lamp fantasy. That was a very fine episode that you can find in the archives. But today, because Laura Ann's book 3 is now on Kickstarter, we have her back talking about Monster Hunters, and I'm very excited about this. It's a very cool trope. It's a very fun world building thing to write. I'm super hyped. But before I get too carried away, I must start by introducing Laura Ann properly, for she is far too modest to introduce herself. We have Laura Anne Gilman. She is the author of the Locus bestsellers, Silver on the Road and The Cold Eye, the award-winning Devil's West trilogy, the popular Cosa Nostradamus books, the Retrievers and the Paranormal Scene Investigations urban fantasy series, and the Nebula Award-nominated The Vineheart War trilogy. I know, right? But we are here especially to talk about the Huntsman series, her current series, which is literally about monster hunters. Think Grim-style monster hunters in a gaslamp fantasy world, set on the eastern seaboard just before World War One. And I do have the pitch from the Kickstarter. So are you ready for this? The year is 1913. America and the world trembles on the edge of a modern age. But in the shadows, things from the past still move. Things magical, uncanny. And all that stands between humanity and chaos are huntsmen. And their hellhounds. Now, I hear the hellhounds have been an incredibly popular highlight in this series.
Oh, yes. Yeah, people love Botheration, which is not his full name. His full name is a very long stream in German. But as a puppy, he got nicknamed Botheration for probably obvious reasons to anybody who has a dog, and it's stuck.
I love that so much. It's just really sweet and appealing. He always obviously he's terrifying hellhound, but he's very endearing. You've somehow managed to write a dog that is both terrifying and endearing at the same time. Like you've absolutely nailed it. I can see why he's a fan favorite. And I heard in the Kickstarter that there may be some botheration. Is that correct?
Yeah, one of the our next stretch goal is a story collection of original stories, and I have promised readers that there will be a story about Botheration in that collection if we make it. Yeah,
Exciting.
my dog
Very
has
exciting.
insisted, actually.
Okay, so you're writing from experience here, I can see.
Oh God, yes. Yeah.
Amazing. So books 1 and 2 are already out. I've read book 1. I super enjoyed it. Book 3 is now on Kickstarter, already funded in 9 hours, by the way. Absolutely incredible. Congratulations. And you are roaring through the stretch goals. And I heard that if people are excited and they want to get the whole series by backing the Kickstarter, they can do that. Is that correct?
Yes, we are making the first 2 books available in trade paperback for people who back at that level. Because I realize, yeah, it's very difficult to come into each book is a standalone adventure, but it always helps to have the full series. Yeah.
Absolutely. And some of us slightly more obsessive types may not be able to start a book 3 if they know there is a book 1 and a book 2. I'm not talking about obviously anyone I know,
No,
but
no, nobody on this
just
podcast is like
just
that. No.
no, definitely not myself. No, but some people might obsessively want to read the books in order for reasons of obsessiveness. So yeah, it's very, very exciting and helpful that you do that. So thank you on behalf of all people who cannot read book 3 if book 1 exists, even if they are standalone adventures. I do appreciate that. All right, I think we need to kick off about Monster Hunters because goodness, there's a lot to say, and it's a rich topic for exploring, for world building, for gaming, for all that jazz. So I thought we could start with some iconic Monster Hunters. Who do we think of when we think of Monster Hunters? Who are our favorite Monster Hunters? Folks in the chat, feel free to weigh in. Folks listening to the podcast, throw them in the comments of the podcast. I want to know. But yeah, let's kick off with Laura Ann. Favorite iconic Monster hunters?
Okay, you have to understand that my background is as a history major and an English literature major, or a literature major, with a specialization in medieval studies. So I'm going to say Gilgamesh and Beowulf.
Ooh, Beowulf was on my list.
But I mean, I love Gilgamesh, hunted a whole bunch of monsters.
Mm.
And mostly, I mean, honestly, if you read carefully, Gilgamesh was an a-hole and not somebody you want to really hang out with. And you kind of feel sorry for some of the monsters that he hunted. And Beowulf actually made things worse by hunting monsters. I mean, Google Grendel's mother. So I love the take on that. And then, you know, obviously, modern, quote unquote, modern literature, everybody's going to say, um, you know, the Harkers. And yes, for those of you who have read book 1 or book 2, yes, my hero's last name is Harker. It was definitely a shout out. There is no connection in that world, but I wanted to make that connection. They're just, I mean, but you go through from every generation is going to have a story about monster hunters because we always have monsters.
Mm,
Um,
absolutely.
you know, like I said, my resources go way back into medieval literature, and the joke here is always, what is the most common monster hunted in medieval period? And anybody who has ever looked at an illustrated manuscript knows that it's giant snails.
Yeah.
Because
There's something about
every monk had these giant snails in the margin because by God they were destroying their gardens or whatever. But this was the monster. Which goes back to it's everything that scares us.
yeah, absolutely. It's fine. I've seen those manuscripts. There's actually I recorded a CD of back when I was a professional musician and not a writer and a software person. I recorded a whole CD of Victorian children's songs, and one of those is about a bunch of knights who go and hunt a giant snail.
Yep.
And it's taken directly from that. Like that has survived into Victorian children's songs, which is very interesting. Kind of wild. But yeah, there's a lot of strange things in manuscripts if you really take a lot of nuns picking odd things off trees and all sorts of other
Oh
odd things
yeah,
in
that's a
medieval
classic.
manuscripts.
That now
Yes.
everybody listening to the podcast is going, wait, what? I got to go look this up. Go look it up. You
Yeah.
will not be disappointed.
Yeah. This is a PG podcast, so I can't tell you exactly what the nuns are picking, but I'm sure you can imagine. Otherwise, go and take a look. You won't be disappointed. Um, I had Jonathan Harker and, of course, Van Helsing on my list. Van Helsing also shouted out in the chat, absolutely never moored. I want to give a shout out to Hercules, Theseus, Perseus, all the Yusses. They killed a lot of monsters. They hunted a lot of monsters. Sometimes they did it for honor. Sometimes they did it for sport. Sometimes they just had a list that had been handed to them because they had some labors to get through. But they ran around and hunted monsters a lot, and that was a real core piece of ancient Greek mythology. And the Renaissance being what it was, ancient Greek mythology has continued to be hugely important. So, the reception history of these Herculeses and Persei, it is interesting. It's interesting how we have remade these sort of ancient monster hunters as modern monster hunters as well. I think that's very interesting. You see things like I always get it wrong. Percy Jackson, where he's literally, he's created kind of that same thing in modern life, and there's a lot more subtle kind of instances of this as well. But yeah, iconic monster hunters.
And
If you're looking for a pattern, they're pretty good ones.
Yeah, and right into the modern age, talking about the modern stuff, Supernatural.
Also came up in the chat. Where are
yes,
we?
and I joke. Those of you who are fans of the show, I joke that I wrote the Huntsman books because I spent 15 years as an avid fan shouting at the TV screen, "Your world building sucks. You have no continuity. You're not using what." And finally, a friend said, "Put up or shut up." And I'm like, okay, but I'm going to do it under my terms, which is why I did it historical. I wanted to play with the changing of society. from into as things were moving into a modern age, and we were pretending that these things in the shadows didn't exist. But I was just like, no, I'm sorry, I got to do this right. I got to do this properly. There has to be continuity. You need world building, but it is very much the modern take on these monsters.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fellow feeling in the chat. Felix van Hus says, I was the exact same
We are
Supernatural fan.
Legion. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like they needed a world anvil for their world building continuity. Imagine.
Yes.
Um, I want to shout out Geralt of Rivia, obviously one of the more popular monster hunters these days.
Yes.
He has transcended media. I met him first via the Witcher 3 video game, and then the TV series, and finally via the books. But like that is his raison d'être, and the world building around it is very interesting. You know, the way they have created, you know, a school of monster hunters
Yes.
essentially, and it's a sort of very loose organization that is and isn't an organization in many ways. It's quite fascinating, and I think he's definitely one of the ones that comes to mind first when I think about, you know, modern interpretations of monster hunters in fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
um I would also say Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if we're talking about shows.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one in that the two variations that you just mentioned, one a society of monster hunters, and one it's all one person's responsibility.
Right, it's all on the chosen one.
Yeah. Um, and I am not a big fan of chosen one stories. They have their place, but I think we can rely on them. I like a scenario where it's somewhere in between.
Mm,
Huntsmen, in my case, huntsmen are they're it's an extended family. They are worldwide. They have a particular reason for being huntsmen, which is not a spoiler here. They have some non-human blood in them back in history,
yeah,
um, but they're not all required to be huntsmen. It is a choice that most of them make.
it's
So
an opt-in.
yeah, because I don't think you can. Being a monster hunter is, yes, it can be something that is thrust upon you, but I think it also has to be a choice.
Mm,
You have to say, this is a thing I'm going to do. Whether it's a thing why you do the thing can be varied. But I think for the character to be compelling and to be satisfying to the reader or the viewer, they have to have a reason to be doing it, and
yeah.
and make a choice, even if it's a reluctant choice to be doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly in stories where the monster hunter is compelled, that's certainly something that they have to come up against again and again is, why the hell am I doing this to myself? How do I opt out of this life? Because it's kind of hard, and the
Yes.
monsters don't really like being hunted and they tend to fight back. And it's taking me away from my work slash school slash job in a police force slash whatever, right?
Mhm.
So yeah,
Also, it doesn't pay well.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, hence toss a coin to your Witcher, right? Like, there's a reason that was big on the internet. Uh, so I feel like we've strayed here, and I'm not mad at all. Why do we love Monster Hunters? What's the appeal?
Oh, a lot of it is just cathartic. Whether it's a video game or it's a book or a movie, watching somebody go out and kick some monster booty, um, excuse me, is cathartic. It's You're watching somebody take on something that is big and scary, and dangerous and threatening, and most of the time win. May take some blows in the fight, but lives to fight the next day, and the monster doesn't. And that is really satisfying. Whether you're 5 years old and the thing under the bed, dad or mom and dad get rid of it, or whatever, uh, that is it's an endorphin rush.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always fun to watch highly competent people struggle and then overcome something. This is, Gregory House MD is one. Sherlock Holmes, of course, whom he was based on, is another. It's always fun to watch incredibly competent people do something interesting, and watch the try-fail cycles and the journey to do something very interesting. And I think that most monster hunters are very competent. If not at the beginning, certainly if there's a happy ending, they tend to be quite competent.
I think I would disagree with you slightly in that, yeah, competence porn is definitely a thing. We all love it. But I think a lot of monster hunters, yeah, they get better or they die. But there's also, I think the really successful monster hunters, by successful, I mean the ones that we resonate with, are the ones who maybe aren't as capable, or have to come at it a different way. Because monster hunting isn't just stabbing the monsters.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you need to have a whole bunch of different skills. And we mentioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It wasn't just Buffy, though. That's why she was successful. There was Willow, there was Xander, there was Giles, there was even Cordelia. I loved Cordelia. All of these things that maybe not the world's most elegant solutions, maybe not the best at what they do, but determination and ingenuity are really a large part, and thinking fast on your feet when nothing else works. And that's one of the things I really love about Monster Hunter stories, is not, I'm going to go in and I'm going to kill the monster. It's more, okay, what the heck are we facing? And how do we buy time so it doesn't kill us before we can kill it? Yeah. Because the monsters are always stronger. The monsters are always bigger. The monsters are always scarier. That's why they're monsters.
Yeah, absolutely. I have our knights in grungy armor as one of my notes for this. Not always, but often they are people who, for one reason or another, and we will go into that later, have decided to step up and deal with monsters. And these are things that normal people can't deal with. And I think that that is something that makes monster hunters very appealing. They do risk themselves. They do put their life on the line for whatever reason. And that does make them very appealing. They are willing to sacrifice themselves if everything goes wrong. They don't plan to, but they know what's at stake. And I think that's another thing that can make them a very appealing character within a story.
Yeah, I think also we need to remember that monster hunters, by definition, are not normal.
Yes,
because normal people are home with doors locked, hiding under the bed with a baseball bat. To actually go into danger willingly requires a certain amount of, I'm not going to say psychosis, but maybe. Or in some cases, you have absolutely nothing left to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing that can make those characters very appealing, is that they're not the standard run-of-the-mill person in this world. There is, they do feel different, even if they're not alone, even if they're hunting with many other people, or they, somebody mentioned, a good monster hunter needs a support staff.
Yes.
I absolutely. And we mentioned sometimes they're loners, but they have help, and sometimes they are, part of an organization, but there are often other people, even if they kind of come in and out of the story. But in some way they are different, and I think that's something that is often very appealing, that they're set apart somehow, and that can make them very intriguing, I think.
It's also a level of loneliness to the job, isolation, that I think people, we always love that underdog, that the loner, but we can also resonate with the feeling that you're on your own with this. And seeing them succeed or sometimes fail but survive is reassuring.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of deep psychology there. Let's talk a little bit about why. Every good character needs a motivation. What are some good motivations for monster hunters? Why do they hunt monsters?
Revenge is always top of the list. Whether it's because your girlfriend is being seduced by a vampire, or they, something killed your family. I mean, these are all the classic tropes of any reason somebody takes up arms against. justice. If you may not have a personal stake in it, but something has happened and you are the one who is called or hired, in many cases, to fix it. And sometimes guilt.
Yeah.
If your monster hunter feels responsible in some way because they didn't stop something, we're talking about draw theory before, you will go to all the ends to make it right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's also the two reasons that I think we can't ignore: adventure and money.
Yep. Classic ones.
Because if you're hired to clear something out, you're going to go do it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also doing it for honor. So, Hercules absolutely did the seven labors of Hercules so he could say he'd done them. That was a CV filler if I have ever seen one.
Is that honor or is that ego?
Yes, and that's also a very interesting question. And that also puts it up for debate. Like, did you kill it just so you could put its head in your throne room, for example?
Yeah.
There is another one that's just occurred to me, and that is self-loathing, and I am thinking of Blade, which is
Oh,
who is
yeah.
absolute my number one favorite superhero is Blade. I think he is such a compelling hero. I love him. I also love Wesley Snipes, of course, but I love Blade. And I think that there is a certain amount of self-loathing that makes him kill vampires. It's kind of of course he has a very tragic story. Of course, there's a lot of different motivators there, and there are hundreds of iterations of and reboots of Blade with slightly different stories, but there is a certain amount of I am part of this, and I kill vampires because self-loathing, because I
Yeah.
am kind of a vampire and I kind of hate it, and I can't. This is my way of dealing with this. This
Mm-hmm.
this is my stabby therapy, essentially. And I think that's, if you can do that well, that is very interesting as well.
Yes. It is really important, though, I think, as a creator, to keep a very clear line when you're walking that, because it is very easy to turn that self-loathing into distaste for the character
Mm,
that the reader or the viewer or the player is going to pick up on.
yeah,
That's why I like guilt better than self-loathing as a motivator, because guilt can be a positive thing, and
yeah,
self-loathing is very difficult to turn into any kind of positive thing.
yeah,
That said, it's fun to do in small doses.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, always hurt your characters, first of all.
Yeah. Don't hurt real people. Hurt
Hurt your
imaginary
characters,
people.
yes.
Okay then. So we have touched on this. No, I'm going to do this one next. We talked a lot about monster hunters, but uh, a monster hunter generally tends to be a more specialized unit. Um, so how can we tailor our monster hunters to our monsters and vice versa? And which way do you like to approach that?
Oh, here we're getting into some of my favorite stuff. I love the process of creating the world that my stories are in, because everything flows organically from that. So almost always the monster comes first for me,
Mm,
which is to say, what is the society? What is the world? What is the threat? And just talking about the Huntsman books, the threat there, as I said, is a world where there has been for generations a treaty that has kept certain really dangerous things out of the human world, while slightly less dangerous things are allowed to stay. Um, and the huntsmen basically deal with the things that have been allowed to stay,
mm,
mostly. Um, so this is a world where you have a delineation of uh, threats and categories of threats, and some of them are, it's all natural to this world. So I had to have monster hunters that were also natural to that world, who could see the gradations.
yeah.
A brownie is a monster, but it's not a dangerous monster. It's an annoying monster. So that's how huntsmen for me were tailored to recognize levels of threat and to react accordingly and responsibly. They don't just go out and kill everything. But if you have a world where the monsters are unknown and come out of nowhere, and you don't know what they are, then everything becomes a threat. So your monster
Yeah.
hunter is going to kill everything because you don't know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll talk about tactics in a minute, but I think that one of the big lines is I became a monster hunter and monsters are very confusing and unknown, and there is not a lot of knowledge about them. Or, for example, Geralt of Rivia is like this.
Mhm.
Grimm, the TV
Oh,
show, was
yes.
like this as well. There is a lot of information, and a lot of the way that you deal with the monsters is by learning about them first. This is one of my preferences because I am
Research,
very
research.
bookish. Yes, exactly. And that becomes part of the fun. And I think it all comes down to documentation and research in the end. Like, how much do your monster hunters know or
Mhm.
care about knowing about your monsters? And how I also think how intelligent are the monsters is the other question.
Yes.
Because, there are monsters that are, okay, it's a wolf, but it's big. Or if it's an ooze, but it's big. And these
It's
are
a
these are not
gelatinous cube and it's big.
right.
Yes.
Exactly. And some of them are not even sentient, let alone
Mhm.
sapient. Some of them just, they exist because they exist and they are a danger and therefore we call them monsters. But then there are monsters like, Dracula, who is terribly terrifying because he's incredibly intelligent and
Mhm.
lurksome and all the terrifying things that he is that need a very different approach. And I
Yeah.
think the kind of monster you have defines the kind of monster hunter you have. Are you a I just go in with my flaming sword, or are you a I must plan, right?
There's also the question we talked before about honor and ego.
Yeah.
Is there, in this world, is there a monster that is a threat, or is your monster an obstacle?
Yeah.
Going back to Gilgamesh, because I'm always
Mm,
going to go back to Gilgamesh. Yeah, buy me a drink someday and let me run. But the monsters that Gilgamesh hunted did not come after them. Um, they Gilgamesh and Enkidu went hunting to do a thing, and a monster was defending the thing that they wanted to do.
yeah.
And this is, I mean, we're going to go back to Medusa again.
Yeah.
How many of these monsters were actually active threats, and how many of them were things like, well, I'm just going to clear this out because this is how I earn renown, this is how I earn my living. That also is going to affect and be affected by the world that you create.
Yeah.
Is it a matter of honor? Is it a matter of, I'm going to make this area safe so that people can move in? Or is it a matter of, these monsters are coming at us and I must defend?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
you can mix and match. I mean, there's no reason to say it has to be one or the other.
Totally. And also you want to match your monster hunter to your monster in that,
Mhm.
like, Hercules was not the right person to meet the Sphinx. Hercules is basically, bless him, a meathead. He was fine with a Nemean lion. That's okay. The Sphinx was not going to be his thing. And so what you need is you need a monster hunter who's clever
Mhm.
to meet the Sphinx, because otherwise
Yeah.
that's not going to go well and they're going to end up as Sphinx kibble. You
Yes.
know, like that's the
They,
end of
they,
that story.
they become an object lesson then.
Yes, exactly, which I'm fine with, but
I should
just
say
be
also,
aware of what
you
you're
you
writing.
should always have some monster hunters who are object lessons.
Yes,
This is also
absolutely.
part of the world building. There always has to be somebody who went before and failed.
Yes. Absolutely. I was going to say the ones who went before,
Yeah.
the ones whose armor was spat out. These are things that you can use as myth. You can foreshadow them in different ways. You could literally just, oh my God, it's the famous shield of such and such.
That a
Um,
dragon crapped out. Yes.
right, exactly. There's a lot of ways to do this, but yeah, like absolutely, and that's a great way to show threat as well, threat level, and stakes, because some famous dude was eaten by this guy is a very easy way to be like, okay, here are the stakes.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I think matching your monster hunters and your monsters is a critical step that some people don't do. And while there are different ways to skin a sphinx, you do want the right person to be doing that in order for the story to be interesting. I think like a sphinx is wasted on a meat man with a big hammer. I feel like that's a waste of a good monster. Um, so yeah,
Although it
these are
does, if and again, not all monster hunting is serious stuff. So if you are writing a comedic or creating a comedic situation,
Yeah.
having the Sphinx having a monster that is very clever and is going to, and then having the meathead come in and whoomp, with a hammer
Yeah.
has the comedic relief. I mean, then you have to do something serious, but don't overlook the possibilities of mismatching
Yeah.
your hero and monster. And sometimes your monster hunter gets their backside whooped and they have to retreat and try again. Just go back to the learning curve.
Yeah.
But these are all things that you do have to look at. Okay, this is the monster. This is the monster hunter. And if there's a mismatch, how do you use that? And to what effect do you use that? And what lesson is being taught in that for your hero and also the readers?
Absolutely. There is a comment here that is exactly what I was thinking of. It's like when Indiana Jones puts out the pistol in the scimitar
Mhm.
fight. Yes, absolutely. If you have seen that movie, it is absolutely that moment. I do think there's another thing, and this is something that is often used in a more literary way, is that the monster often represents the dark self or the other, or sometimes they represent the tragic flaw of the monster hunter or the hero. So you can use monsters in a more literary way. You can use them in a more thematic way as well. I think somebody mentioned Medusa in the chat, and Medusa has a horribly tragic backstory.
Yep.
I'm not going to go into it because trigger warnings abound, but if you are interested, you can go look that up. She is a very sad, misused woman. And she is filled with rage, and I kind of don't blame her. So when Perseus comes along with a shiny shield, that's a potential to tell a very interesting story that's not necessarily just about big man with shield. It's actually about something deeper. And you know, I want to read that. Somebody needs to write that, please. And
I'm
thank you.
making
Um,
notes right now.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Uh, I know if it comes from you, it will be excellent. But yeah, like there is a lot that you can do there with, the monster as a tragic figure as well. The monster as something more than just an obstacle, something more than just a thing to be overcome. The monster as statement, the monster as a showcase of what can happen when things go wrong. And we'll talk a little bit more about endings again in a minute, but there are a lot of interesting ways that can go apart from just we stab the monster.
I was going to say, if you really want to go literary, speaking of stabbing the monster, Moby Dick.
Mm, absolutely.
I mean,
Classic,
that
classic monster
is
story.
an adventure story, but oh my God, the metaphors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and the book does not pretend otherwise. If you haven't read the book, by the way, even if you find like the kids version, it is worth reading. It's fascinating. It's slow, but it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an absolutely imbued with meaning, that book.
Mhm.
Very, very weighty between the lines. Um, Yeah, so you can have comedic monster hunters, you can have very serious monster hunters, you can have very literary monster hunters, where the monster wasn't a monster all along. There's a lot of ways to do this that are very interesting, and it really depends on what you're setting out to do, I think, at the end of the day. Like be aware that this is a powerful matching that will speak volumes whether you intend it to or not, I think. Um,
Just by the
let's
definition of your world's definition of what a monster
yeah.
is going to tell your reader exactly where they are and what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I keep coming back to Geralt of Rivia because I'm very familiar with him and he's very well known. There was a Netflix series, there was a Cavialization. But essentially one of the big themes is who really is the monster? Dot dot
Mhm.
dot. And it sounds very, silly and overdramatic, but it's a theme that comes back again and again and again. Is really what is a monster and who is a monster and where are the
And
lines,
how long can you hunt monsters before you become a monster? I mean, that's the whole looking into the
Absolutely.
void thing. And I think something that absolutely, when you're creating a monster hunter, you need to either create a system where they can be pulled back,
Yeah.
or you need to create a system where there are repercussions if somebody does fall into that void. Are they ever going to, if you have an organization, do they have a plan in place to take out somebody who becomes too dangerous for whatever reason? Or, is there a fail-safe, or is it just, and then everything goes to absolute hell kind of thing? If somebody is working alone, what happens when they become their own worst enemy and everybody else's worst enemy? These are things that, I mean, it may never come up in the storytelling, but I think the creator has to be aware of these pitfalls and have a plan in place in their head. What would happen if?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
you've
absolutely.
created a dangerous character.
Yeah, totally. And they are a threat if they get, sent off on the wrong trajectory according to the organization.
Yeah.
Let's talk about endings, because I think this is very interesting. We've, referred many times that stabby is not always the end to a Monster Hunter story. What for you are alternate interesting endings beyond just a stab?
One of the things I played with when I was writing the Vine War books was the idea of letting the monster destroy itself, which is a refusal to engage and just letting them implode.
Yeah.
Which you have to set up very carefully, but it's definitely an interesting way to deal with something. Negotiation. Figuring out, I mentioned before, it's like, are you going in somewhere to destroy the monster? Well, or are you going in to get something that the monster is defending? Well, can you negotiate? Can you work around it? Can you find a way to not kill it? Because you may not need to.
Yeah.
It may be, again, definition, what is a monster? If you're sent in, if your monster hunter is sent in saying, you got to clear this out, this monster out, this horde, this Medusa creature is defending this. Yes, in one way it's satisfying to say, hey, look, I made you look at your own reflection and now you're stone. I don't think we have spoilers. That story is old enough.
Oh, yeah.
But there's also the idea of, because Medusa was a tragic figure and was filled with rage, to be able to say, I am not a threat to you. This is what I need. And by the way, those folk over there are who you're really mad at. So go after them with my blessing, redirect the monster. This is fun. Taming the monster. Every dragon story, every unicorn story, the whole story of if you send a virgin out, the unicorn will lay its head in its lap and be captured. That's taming the monster rather than killing it. We won't get into the whole symbolism of virgin laps and horned animals. PG rated, right. But these are ways that have been used historically to bypass the need for actual violence. Whether because violence is not necessarily the answer, or because the monster hunter is not actually capable of killing the monster. So you use guile, you use trickery, you use negotiation to create a scenario where even if everybody doesn't win, nobody loses.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. It also depends on the monster in question. So if you have a more animalistic monster, it may be that the monster is protecting its young, or something has been deforesting its natural area, or like destroying its food reserves or something. And those are interesting different takes on the end of a monster. Because if you can somehow move their young away from a built up area, actually that's a great resolution. Like if you can do that without being eaten, and everybody lives happily ever after in a new site that is not somebody's backyard, the monster can continue to live happily with its little younglings, and it's in the wilderness and it's not bothering anyone. It's not really a monster unless it's in your back garden, if you see what I mean.
Exactly. Conversely, I mean, if you are tired of dragons taking off princesses, negotiate a share of your goat herd.
Yeah, absolutely.
Find alternatives. Do things like that. It's not as immediately graphically satisfying as stabby.
Yeah.
but it can make a much more interesting story and much more of a challenge for your characters
Yeah.
to, rather than just going in with the sledgehammer or the sword or the napalm or whatever, but to say, I'm going to figure out a way that we can do this with a minimal of bloodshed, particularly mine.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just food for thought, I recently read The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. It's a very fun book, in which they, not really a spoiler, it's in the title, try and preserve kaiju and keep them safe because kaiju be kind of dumb. And they do a lot of this by basically trying to control them with the hormones and various other things to protect the kaiju and stop them from eating people. And that is a very good way of controlling a monster without necessarily killing
Mhm.
the monster because, in that book, they're literally trying to preserve them and protect them, not destroy them. So that also becomes very interesting. They're not technically monster hunters, but I think it's a very interesting kind of paradigm to go and explore. And I would recommend the book. It's a huge amount of fun. You'll rip through it in no time. It's very quick, fun, enjoyable read. I love that one. So yeah, that's, some things to do with monsters. And I would say monster hunters often tend to be more than a one shot. They tend to be a series. They may fight many monsters over the course of a single novel. If they're killing everything that they meet, A, I've got opinions about this dude, but B, I mean, really, is this necessary? But B, it kind of gets dull, and I think that's important to give different resolutions to these scenarios, so that you're keeping your audience entertained and you're exploring the world in interesting ways. And that's something that even in its own merit is useful to create different endings. Speaking of differences, what are some tactics that monster hunters can use? Because, hunting a monster, it's a whole production, it's not like I'm going to hunt a monster. Oh, there it is. The end. Like stuff has to happen, right?
Yeah. And you also have to think about, how do you find the monster? I mean, if it's showing up on your doorstep, obviously, you know, um, tracking is important. I mean, I mentioned botheration before. Bother is a hellhound. Um, he's actually a descendant of the Malasar breed, which is an ancient breed in Rome that they used in the pits.
Mm,
The ancestor of all mastiffs, basically. Um, he has certain abilities that humans don't. First of all, his nose is incredibly powerful, obviously, like any dog. But he can also tell when something uncanny is around because he is uncanny himself. He's just been bred to be an assistant rather than
sure.
a threat.
So he's a very helpful spook detector, essentially.
Yes.
Um,
And very, I mean, those teeth are very, very useful. But you have to be able to, your character has to be able to see their environment. So tracking, yes. Fighting skills, obviously, ideally knows how to distract and divert. Uh, in my books, Rosemary and Aaron, sibling team, they work together very well because they think very differently.
mm,
Rosemary is very pragmatic, very focused. Aaron, bless him, a little different. He's definitely neurodivergent or neurospicy, and he sees things differently, and he reacts to things a little differently, and they make a very good pair in that regard because they come at it from different directions. And I think that's really, if you have more than one monster hunter, having those differences in how they approach things is essential. Going back to Buffy, you had all these characters who had different strengths.
yeah.
So it's not just all stalk, stab, bleed. Uh, you also need to be able to determine its environment. If you destroy a situation, will the monster then leave or die? Um, if you if it's a water creature, well, what happens if you get it out of water? That sort of thing. You need to think about the environment that it's in. I'm laughing now because I'm thinking, anybody who's ever seen Caddyshack, the movie, if gophers are your monster, do you dynamite the holes? Is that going to work? And the answer is no in that movie. So you have to be a little smarter.
Yeah.
But yeah, destroying the habitat is definitely one way. Luring them out, distracting them, giving them something else to go for, as we mentioned, giving them something that they want somewhere else. And sometimes just going in and stabbing them with a silver knife.
No.
Knowing what weapon works.
Yeah, knowing their weakness, I think. There are two very common tropes within tactics. The monster hunter has some kind of extrasensory something. So super hearing, super smell, or they have somebody who has super smell, or they can see the secret thing that nobody else can see, as in Grimm, for example. There's something that they have that gives them an edge that other people don't have, and that helps with the tactics. The other thing is that many monsters have some kind of weakness, and if you know what that is very helpful. And that's where it gets down to, making sure you have the whatever it is in stock, or you can go find it, which often ends up part of the arc itself. Like, oh, we need a silver dagger. Ain't no silver daggers around here. We need to go and find one in a museum or retrieve one from a dungeon somewhere or what have you.
Yeah.
And I think that if you seed these things in as tactics, it can give you a very interesting kind of story arc all by itself, if you see what I mean.
One of my favorite examples of that, steal it from Supernatural, where, okay, bullets don't kill demons, but they carved demon traps on the bullets. So when the bullet went into the body, it trapped the demon there.
Yeah.
And I saw that and I'm like, okay, point to you guys. That was kind of brilliant. I love
Very
that.
cool. Yeah.
It's not something I can steal now because you did it and did it so well, but things like that, knowing that you can take this tactic and that tactic and combine them. And if they can do that in the heat of the moment,
Yeah.
and improvise on the fly, that's the mark of a really good monster hunter. Somebody who is going to see the scenario, see the problems, come up with something. It may not work the first time, but working on the fly to not die.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say pheromones again. I mentioned John Scalzi, but they're used in other things. I've seen them used again in Witcher and various other things as well. Maddie Holmes says holy water through your lawn sprinkler system, and I am here for it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are so many creative ways that you can play with these things. The ultraviolet flashlight that Secondhand Samurai has mentioned for vampires, again, very very interesting play. Blade, I mentioned I'm a big Blade fan, uses all sorts of interesting fun tech and this kind of thing, and that does depend a little bit on your technology level of your setting as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this can be the space where a lot of fun gadgets can come in as well.
And just also using what you have naturally. I mean, vampires, sunlight, the whole reveal of pulling away the curtains because you've distracted the vampire and it's after dawn.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah. Keep it monologuing.
Garlic.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a story, I can't remember where I read it years ago, about somebody who basically invited a monster that was allergic to garlic into the house and was like, oh, let's have a meal. And was pretending that they didn't know and served them a stew filled with garlic. And they died at the table.
Okay.
So again, this is a trickster. We didn't even mention tricksters, but a good monster hunter needs to be a little bit of a trickster because the monster could be a little bit of a trickster.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you have that going up against each other, you've got an amazing story of them trying to outwit each other.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good story. Somebody go out and write that.
Yeah. I would say also traps and ambushes. Like, get the monster to come to you. You don't always have to go to the monster. You were talking about luring out before. And I think traps and ambushes are things that are, used a lot in hunting in the real world and kind of underused in stories because we always want our character to be like active and doing things. But told in the right way, that can be a very interesting kind of opener, especially if it doesn't quite work.
It's been used a lot with werewolves.
Yes.
Because if you can catch a werewolf in a pit when it's in its wolf form and then it's stuck as a human,
Right.
you then can kill it, or however you're going to deal with it. Um, any of the less intelligent monsters,
Yeah.
you can lure in and trap, depending on how your dragons are designed, griffins, that sort of thing. There are a number of, I think, Japanese tales that involve things like setting out meals or
Mm,
luring them with salt or something that they crave and luring them in, trapping them, and then negotiating your way out. And
interesting.
I wish I had somewhere in my back shelves, I have an entire book of those stories. Um, but thinking about things like that of what is mentioned before, what is the monster's weakness? Do you
Yeah.
know it? If you don't know it, how do you find out what the weakness is? You have to study what it's done, and sometimes it's just trial and error. Sometimes the
Yeah.
entire story is trial and error until you hit the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that can be super interesting as well. Okay. In our final few minutes, common mistakes to avoid. I always ask this because I feel like we've made the mistakes, so you don't have to. Um, and I feel like that's useful. I'm gonna come out with one I've already said, which is don't have all monster hunters, don't have your monster hunters deal with every single monster the same way.
Mhm.
I think that's boring. I think it's much more interesting to have them, try and resolve some, be forced to kill some, negotiate, use different strategies in different situations. That shows us a much more interesting character and actually a much more likable character because they're not just, to the sword. That's great. I love that. And I think that they can get very samey if all monster
Mhm.
hunters treat all monsters the same way.
Yeah, for me, the biggest mistake I think that anyone can make is giving your hero too much, which is to say, if they have too many tools, if they have too many toys, if they have too much knowledge, if they have too many powers. Because what happens then is each time you do that, each time your heroine levels up, your monsters also have to level up
Then you
until
get
you're basically at God level with both of them. And honestly, those stories get boring very fast. Don't make either side too powerful. You can do it once. You can have your hero go up against a god once. If your hero is constantly going up after gods, they have to be a god themselves at that point.
yeah.
And where do you go from there? What do you do? We refer to that as the power up problem.
Yes.
And if you have too many power ups, it's time to stop the game, stop the story, because there is nowhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That power creep is lethal. I actually released a video last week about the triangle of power, which is about kind of abilities and costs and limitations and how you can use both costs and limitations to help prevent OP and power creep. So I do recommend that maybe Secondhand Samurai can find the URL of that, or I can go and hunt for it. But yeah, I have thought on this at length because this is a major problem in games and in RPGs especially, but also in
Yes.
stories. You want to show progression, you want to show things getting more powerful, you want to make it exciting, but also sometimes you want those things to not work. Uh,
The
so
other thing,
yeah.
sorry, go on.
No, 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 I'm done.
The other thing I would like to recommend is the story should not just be about the monster hunting.
Yeah.
Your characters need to have lives, even if it revolves around their hunting,
Yeah.
there needs to be something else going on. They need to have depth and texture. Um, I was kind of distracted. My cat just decided to get in the screen. Um, sorry. You need to be able to have them have something that happens in their lives when they're not on the hunt, or even when they're on the hunt. I mean, one of my favorite things is having their parent call.
Mm.
Like, where are you? You were supposed to be here for dinner. A little busy now. Sorry, get back to you. It's a comedic moment. But it also humanizes your monster hunter. It ties them back to humanity. It ties them back to the world. Even if they're estranged from their family or whatever, there is that tie, that pullback. I think that's really important when you're creating these characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go in hard and say another common mistake is there's not enough reason for them to hunt monsters. We talked about motivations earlier. If if you just joined us, go back and watch that bit on the VOD. But yeah, there has to be a really compelling reason why they are hunting monsters, and usually that ends up tied in some interesting way to their character arc
Yes.
as they run around hunting monsters. So, these things are deep and interesting and entrenched, and it makes a very compelling, character plot, internal plot to explore a thread of that, an incident of that, something of that, as the external plot is running around and encountering
Yeah.
monsters. So I would say don't underestimate the motivation, because the motivation gives you all the good, juicy character stuff that makes your character interesting and compelling and makes people want to read about them.
And it also allows you to run with that when their motivation runs dry. Why are they still doing it? I mean, is it just inertia? They don't know what else to do. This also humanizes the character and gives them a lot more for you to play with as the
Yes.
creator, as the storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are some of the mistakes that it is possible to make, and we share them, so you don't have to make them. um I have two interesting questions. The first one, you may not be able to answer this, I cannot. Have you seen the Trevor Belmont from the Netflix series?
I have not. I do not have Netflix, so I have not seen it. Sorry, I can't respond to
I'm
that one.
sorry, Vanished D-Lord, I also cannot answer that. I have not seen it. I cannot tell you what I think about him because I do not know him. Sorry. Next up, we have one of the Monster Hunter was forced to become a monster. What
Oh,
are your
always
thoughts?
fun. Always fun. That is a great thing to play with. Um, and in a lot of ways, monster hunters are monsters
Mm,
because they have to be to do what they do. Um, but you can go 100 different ways with that, depending on what kind of monster and how they feel about becoming a monster. Do they embrace it? Do they resist it? We mentioned Blade before. Um, sometimes you can have a monster hunter turn monster, and then a monster hunter has to hunt the monster. And if it's a former compatriot, that's a good story.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes it is, I hate what I've become, and therefore I'm going to fight it. And I'm blanking on, oh God, it turned into a series set in Canada, vampire who helps the cops. Oh God, I'm blanking. God, I haven't had enough coffee. Sorry. But this is a trope that gets used a lot of times with vampires because they can pass for human.
Yeah.
But yeah, werewolves. I mean, good, bad, indifferent, what's going on there? Um, I think that's definitely something fun to play with. Yes, thank you, Tanya Huff. Great books, much better than the series, in my opinion. But these are definitely. I mentioned guilt as a motivator before. This is
Yeah.
definitely room for guilt.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Cedra Honnet has asked, what if the hunters fall in love with those they hunt? Well, then you have romantasy. Um, it's very big genre right now. I've also done a video about romantasy if you would like to
It's
learn more
you
about
have
it.
romantasy or you have tragedy.
Yes, or
Um,
romantotragedy, which is
oof,
romantasy with a very unhappy ending. Don't write
ending,
that. People
yes.
will be super mad. No. Um,
But yeah, no, um, that's a classic conflict,
yeah,
and again, something you can play with depending on what you want the ending to be. Again, is it going to be romantasy? Is it going to be a happy ending? Is it a tragedy? Is this going to end terribly for everybody? Both are valid choices.
yeah,
The question also, how does the hunter then survive that tragedy, and is it more motivation for them?
yeah. I think it's a very fun thing to play with. I think it's easier to understand when, forgive me, the monsters are hot. It is very hard. It has been done. It's very hard if somebody falls in love with a deciduous zombie, shall we say? Like there are things that make this harder for the reader to understand, and there are things that make it easier for the reader to understand. So if you want to go this route, try and make your monsters hot. Uh, not conventionally handsome, right? But like try and find something in them that makes the reader go, yeah, okay, I can see
I
that,
can I can
because
understand this. Yes.
yeah, on some level I get this, because otherwise you are going to alienate a lot of your readers, and they're not going to come with you on this journey Not if you have a deciduous zombie as a partner. Like, still, I have to store my husband in the fridge overnight is not anybody's favorite kind of like. No,
No,
nobody needs that.
I want to read that story though. I know some writers who would do wonders with that short story.
I put it out into the universe. We shall see. Um, I believe it could be interesting. It's not the story I necessarily want to read, but hey, maybe it will surprise me. Um, Speaking of common mistakes, we have made the terrible mistake of talking for an entire hour about Monster Hunters. Um, was it a mistake? I don't think so. I've had a great time. So thank you so much, Laura Ann. This has been absolutely wonderful.
It has been, yes.
Can you just give us a soupçon about the Kickstarter and basically what's going on with that? What's next?
Yeah, the Kickstarter is going extremely well. We're in the last, I think, 5 or 6 days of it. We are this close to getting the story collection of original stories about huntsmen, not just my main characters, but throughout the world and throughout history. So there's going to be some take place in Europe, some place in America, some historical. Um, but it is very much a story of a brother and sister who grew up as monster hunters, who've been trained as monster hunters, who have to worry about things like making rent and how are they going to afford. They just bought a car and they have no idea how they're going to afford the payments. Very relatable. Uh, Things like that. At the same time, they're also learning more about this world and the treaty that is historically been protecting the world and how the treaty might be crumbling. And it might also kind of be their fault.
Interesting.
Um, so yeah, so that's going on. It is each book is an individual adventure. They do all tie together. Depending how this Kickstarter goes, we may have a fourth book. We'll find out.
Very exciting. Folks, if that sounds like your cup of tea, then go and check out Laura Anne Gilman. You can find her at lauraannegilman.com, I believe. I did not check
.net.
that one.
Yeah.
.net, thank you. LauraAnneGilman.net. And of course, the Kickstarter has been shared widely. If it sounds like your thing, then you can get the books 1 and 2 with Kickstarter number 3. And if you think somebody would love this, even if you can't afford to back it, that's fine. The world is what it is. If you think that somebody could love it, why don't you share it with them? Share the Kickstarter on socials. Maybe somebody will find it and it will be their new favorite read. I certainly had a blast reading book number 1. Book number 2 is in my queue and I'm very excited to read it. So yeah, this comes with a personal recommendation for me. I really did think these were a lot of fun. Folks, that is our time. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. You have been a wonderful audience and full of amazing Monster Hunter ideas. Laura Ann, of course, ever the amazing guest. It is always such a pleasure to have you live. We are going to go raid the Rookery. They are talking about gaming and women in gaming. It's important. I'm a woman in gaming. I think it's important. So why don't you go stick around, shout up, light up the forge when you get there to let them know that we sent you, and have yourself a very fabulous day. All there is remains is to grab your hammer and go world build. See you soon, guys. Bye.